When young delivery driver Zeke Williams started his new route, he didn't think much about the daily hug from 82-year-old Mabel Thornberry. It became a simple routine: deliver package, accept hug, continue with his day. For a whole year, they repeated this ritual without fail. But one rainy afternoon, Zeke noticed something strange: a photograph hidden behind Mabel's bookshelf. The young man in the picture looked exactly like him, down to his curly hair and crinkled eyes when he smiled. Why? Does this elderly woman hug Zeke every single day without fail? And what heartbreaking connection lies between them that will change both their lives forever? The grandfather clock in Mabel Thornberry's living room chimed once, signaling 10:15. Right on time, Mabel set down her cup of chamomile tea and shuffled to her favorite armchair by the front window. Even though her arthritis made her bones ache this morning, nothing would stop her daily routine. "Another beautiful day," she whispered to herself, though dark clouds threatened rain. At 82 years old, Mabel had learned to find beauty even on gloomy days. She adjusted the cushion behind her back and smoothed the wrinkles of her flower print dress. From this spot, she had a perfect view of the street, her eyes fixed on the corner where the brown delivery truck would appear. Mabel glanced at the small package on her coffee table. Seeds for her garden that she didn't really need, but the package wasn't the point. It never was. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock kept her company as she waited. On her lap rested a photo album she'd been flipping through earlier. She closed it gently and set it aside. No use getting emotional before he arrived. At exactly 10:22 a.m., the brown delivery truck turned the corner. Mabel's heart lifted. She watched as it slowed down and parked in front of her small white house with the blue shutters. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Zeke Williams, right on schedule. Mabel took a deep breath and pushed herself up from her chair. By the time Zeke reached her porch steps, package in hand, she was already opening her front door. "Good morning, Ms. Thornberry," Zeke called out with a smile that lit up his whole face. At 24, he had the kind of energy Mabel sometimes missed from her younger days. "Zeke, dear." "Right on time, as always," Mabel said, her voice warm despite the cool April air. Zeke bounded up the steps, his uniform slightly wrinkled but clean. He had dark curls peeking out from under his company cap and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "One package for my favorite customer," he said, holding out the small brown box along with his electronic signature pad. Mabel signed with a shaky hand, then set the package and pad down on the small table beside her door. Zeke knew what was coming next. He'd been on this route for exactly 1 year today, and not once had Mabel Thornberry accepted a package without what followed. She opened her arms wide, and Zeke stepped forward, bending down slightly for their daily hug. Mabel's arms wrapped around him, holding tight for just a moment longer than a typical hug between strangers. She patted his back twice before letting go. "Thank you, dear," she said, her eyes shining. "You make an old woman's day brighter." "Happy to do it, Ms. Thornberry. Actually, today marks 1 year since I started this route," Zeke said, straightening his cap. Mabel's eyes widened. "1 whole year? My goodness, that means—" She trailed off, doing the math in her head. 365 hugs, Zeke finished for her with a laugh. "Give or take a few for holidays." "Has it really been that many?" Mabel asked, her voice suddenly softer. Zeke nodded. "Best part of my route, if I'm being honest. My supervisor tells us to be quick, but some things are worth taking time for." Mabel blinked rapidly and patted his arm. "Well, I appreciate that. Would you like some water before you go? Or I baked some oatmeal cookies this morning. Zeke glanced at his watch. I wish I could, but I'm running behind today. Rain's coming, and everyone ordered stuff online this weekend. Of course, dear. You run along then. Mabel picked up her package. Same time tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it, Zeke promised, already backing down the steps. He gave her a quick wave before jogging back to his truck. Mabel stood in the doorway watching until the brown truck disappeared around the corner. Only then did she close her door with a small sigh. Inside, she placed the unopened package with 3 others just like it on the hall table. She wouldn't open it today. That wasn't part of the routine. Mabel returned to her armchair and picked up the photo album again. She opened it to a page with a photo of a young man holding a paintbrush, his smile bright and full of promise. He came today, right on time, she said to the photograph. Such a good boy. You would have liked him. She traced the young man's face with her fingertip, then closed the album and held it against her chest. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window. But Mabel didn't mind. The important part of her day was complete. The hug. Number 365. Tomorrow would be 366. Each one treasured. Each one necessary. Each one holding a secret Mabel wasn't ready to share. Not yet. The wipers on Zeke's delivery truck squeaked as they fought against the spring rain. After leaving Mabel's house, he had 11 more stops before lunch. He turned up the radio to drown out the sound of the storm. Package delivered to Thornberry, Zeke muttered as he tapped the screen on his delivery tablet. He smiled, thinking about the old woman's hug. Some drivers complained about touchy customers, but Zeke didn't mind. There was something about Ms. Thornberry that reminded him of better days. His next stop was the Miller's house. Mr. Miller never said thank you and always complained that his packages were late. Zeke took a deep breath as he parked in front of the large 2-story home with the perfect green lawn. Just smile and nod, he told himself, grabbing the heavy box from the back of his truck. By the time Zeke finished his morning route, the rain had stopped and his stomach was growling. He parked at Sonny's Diner, his regular lunch spot where they knew his order by heart. "Turkey sandwich and sweet tea for my favorite delivery guy," said Monica, sliding into the booth across from him. She'd been waiting tables at Sonny's since high school. "How's the route today?" "Same as always. Started with Ms. Thornberry, ended with the cranky Hendersons." Zeke took a big bite of his sandwich. "Ah, the hugger and the shouters." Monica laughed. "I don't know how you do it day after day." Zeke shrugged. "Gotta pay the bills somehow." "You ever think about going back to school?" Monica asked, refilling his tea without being asked. She'd been asking this question once a week for the past year. "Can't afford it," Zeke said simply. "Mom needs help with the house payment since Dad passed, and her health isn't great either." Monica's face softened. "You're a good son, Zeke, but you're also a crazy talented artist. That sketchbook of yours gathering dust under your bed isn't doing anyone any good." Zeke felt a twinge in his chest. He hadn't touched his sketchbook in months. Before his dad got sick 3 years ago, Zeke had been studying art at the community college. His professors said he had real potential, but life had other plans. "Maybe someday," Zeke said, the words hollow even to his own ears. After lunch, Zeke finished his afternoon deliveries in record time. By 5 o'clock, he was pulling into the employee parking lot behind the delivery center. "Williams!" called his supervisor, Mr. Granger, as Zeke walked toward his beat-up Honda Civic. "Got a minute?" Zeke's stomach tightened. Was he in trouble? Had Mr. Miller complained again? "Yes, sir," Zeke said, changing direction. Mr. Granger was a short man with a round belly and a balding head. He'd been running the delivery center for 20 years and took pride in his efficiency numbers. "Your customer satisfaction scores came in today," Mr. Granger said, looking down at his clipboard. "Top of the team again. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Relief washed over Zeke. "Thank you, sir. There's talk of a supervisor position opening up next month. You should apply." Mr. Granger looked up at him. "Pay bump, benefits, the works." Zeke blinked in surprise. "I'll think about it. Thanks." On the drive home, Zeke couldn't stop thinking about the supervisor job. More money would help with Mom's medical bills, but it also meant being stuck in the delivery business forever. Zeke's apartment building was old but clean. He and his mother lived in a two-bedroom unit on the second floor. The elevator was broken again, so he trudged up the stairs, his legs heavy after a day of deliveries. "Mom, I'm home," Zeke called as he opened the door. Rosa Williams sat in her recliner, crocheting a blanket. At 58, she looked older than her years. Grief and illness had carved deep lines into her face, but her smile was still bright when she saw her son. "How was your day, mijo?" she asked, setting her crochet needles aside. "Good." Mr. Granger mentioned a supervisor position. Zeke dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and kicked off his shoes. "That's wonderful." Rosa's eyes lit up. "Your father would be so proud." Zeke forced a smile. His dad had been a truck driver for 30 years before cancer took him. He'd wanted more for his son. "I made enchiladas," Rosa said. "Your favorite." After dinner, Zeke helped his mom with the dishes, then headed to his small bedroom. He flopped onto his bed and stared at the ceiling. Under the bed, just as Monica had said, was his old sketchbook and a box of drawing pencils. With a sigh, Zeke reached under the bed and pulled out the sketchbook. Dust had collected on the cover. He flipped it open to the last drawing he'd made. A portrait of his father in the hospital, sleeping peacefully between painful treatments. Zeke felt the familiar ache in his chest. He turned to a blank page and, almost without thinking, began to sketch. Soft lines appeared on the page, gradually forming the shape of Mabel Thornberry's kind face. He captured her gentle eyes, the wrinkles that deepened when she smiled, the wisps of white hair that always escaped her neat bun. For the first time in months, Zeke lost himself in his art. The stress of the day melted away as his pencil moved across the paper. When he finally looked at the clock, it was past midnight. The drawing of Mabel was good, maybe his best work yet. There was something about her expression that he'd captured perfectly, a mixture of joy and hidden sorrow. Zeke carefully closed the sketchbook and slid it back under his bed. Tomorrow was another day of deliveries, another day of helping his mom, another day of putting his dreams on hold. But there would also be another hug from Mabel Thornberry, and somehow that made it all a little more bearable. As he drifted off to sleep, Zeke wondered about the photo album he'd glimpsed on Mabel's lap. Who was the young man in the photographs? Why did she always seem both happy and sad to see Zeke? One day, maybe he'd find out, but not yet. The next morning dawned clear and bright, washing away yesterday's rain. Zeke hummed as he organized packages in the back of his delivery truck. He'd woken up feeling lighter somehow, like drawing Mabel's portrait had unlocked something inside him. "You're cheerful today," remarked Darren, another driver, as he loaded his own truck. "Good night's sleep," Zeke replied with a shrug. As always, Mabel Thornberry's delivery was first on his route. Today's package was larger than usual, a rectangular box about the size of a small microwave. Zeke checked the label. Garden supplies from Bloom and Grow online store. At exactly 10:22 a.m., Zeke pulled up to Mabel's house. The white paint looked brighter in the morning sunshine, and he noticed colorful flowers lining the walkway. Had they always been there? Zeke realized he usually rushed through his deliveries, never taking time to notice details. He carefully lifted Mabel's package and headed up the path to her door. Before he could climb the first step, the blue front door swung open. "Good morning, Zeke," Mabel called, her voice cheerful. Today she wore a light blue dress with tiny white polka dots and a cream-colored cardigan. Her white hair was neatly pinned back, though a few wispy strands framed her face. "Morning, Ms. Thornberry," Zeke replied, smiling. "Got something heavy for you today." "Oh my, that does look substantial." Mabel stepped aside. "Why don't you bring it in for me? These old bones aren't what they used to be." This was new. In a year of deliveries, Zeke had never been invited inside. "Of course," he said, climbing the steps. As he passed through the doorway, the scent of lemon furniture polish and something sweet, cookies maybe, filled his nose. Mabel's living room was exactly what Zeke would have expected. Comfortable, old-fashioned, and immaculately clean. A floral-patterned sofa faced a small television that looked rarely used. Doilies protected the arms of chairs and tables from scratches. What surprised him were the plants. They were everywhere. African violets lined the windowsills, a large fern hung in the corner, and small succulents dotted every available surface. "You've got quite the green thumb," Zeke commented as he set the package down by the coffee table. "Plants are good company," Mabel said. "They listen without interrupting." Zeke laughed. His eyes were drawn to the walls, covered with framed photographs. There were old black and white wedding photos, color snapshots of vacations, and many pictures of the same young man at different ages, from baby to young adult. "That's my Frank," Mabel said, noticing his gaze on a wedding photo. "We were married 42 years before he passed. Been 15 years now without him." "I'm sorry," Zeke said softly. "My dad passed 3 years ago. Still feels strange sometimes." Mabel nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The missing doesn't go away, but it changes shape over time. Becomes more like an old friend than a sharp pain." She gestured to the sofa. "Would you care for some water or cookies? I made snickerdoodles this morning." Zeke checked his watch. He was actually ahead of schedule today. "I'd love a cookie, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Mabel's face brightened as she disappeared into the kitchen. Zeke's eyes continued to roam the room. On the coffee table sat the photo album he'd glimpsed yesterday. Beside it was a stack of gardening magazines and a book about painting techniques. In the corner stood an easel with a white sheet draped over it, and a small table beside it held dusty paintbrushes and tubes of paint. "Do you paint, Ms. Thornberry?" Zeke asked when Mabel returned with a plate of cookies and 2 glasses of water. Something flickered across Mabel's face. Surprise, then sadness. "Oh, no," she said quickly. "Those belonged to, well, they're quite old now." She set the treats down and took a seat in her armchair. "Please, help yourself." Zeke took a cookie and bit into it. "These are amazing," he said truthfully. The cookie was perfectly soft with just the right amount of cinnamon. "Thank you, dear." Mabel smiled, but her eyes kept drifting to the covered easel. "So, garden supplies?" Zeke asked, nodding toward the package he'd delivered. "Yes," Mabel said, though she made no move to open it. "I'm planning a new flower bed for the backyard, something cheerful with lots of color." They chatted about gardens, the weather, and Mabel's favorite TV game shows. Zeke found himself relaxing in her company. There was something comforting about Mabel's house and her gentle presence. "You mentioned your father," Mabel said after a pause in the conversation. "What did he do?" "He was a truck driver," Zeke replied. Long-haul routes, mostly. He loved the open road. And your mother? She worked at the hospital as a nurse's aide until Dad got sick. Now she has her own health problems. I help with the bills. Zeke wasn't sure why he was sharing so much, but something about Mabel made it easy to talk. Mabel nodded thoughtfully. And what about you, Zeke? Is delivering packages what you always wanted to do? The question caught him off guard. No, he admitted. I was studying art before Dad got sick. I wanted to be an illustrator. He gestured toward the painting supplies. Looks like someone in your family was artistic too. Mabel's expression changed. She set down her water glass and stood up suddenly. Oh my, look at the time. I shouldn't keep you from your route. Zeke checked his watch. He'd been there almost 15 minutes. You're right. I should get going. He stood and reached for his delivery tablet. Still need your signature. As Mabel signed, Zeke noticed her hand trembling slightly. Thank you for the cookies, he said, and for letting me see your home. Mabel walked him to the door. You're welcome any time, dear. At the doorway, she opened her arms for their daily hug. This time, Zeke noticed how fragile she felt, how her thin frame seemed to lean into him as if drawing strength. When they pulled apart, her eyes were misty. See you tomorrow, Ms. Thornberry, Zeke said. I'll be waiting, she replied. As always. Walking back to his truck, Zeke thought about the covered easel, the painting supplies, and all those photographs of the young man. He thought about how Mabel had changed the subject when he'd asked about them, how she never mentioned children or other family members, how she ordered packages almost daily, but didn't seem to open them. There was more to Mabel Thornberry's story than daily hugs and cookies. Zeke was sure of it now, and he was becoming more curious by the day. As he started his truck, he glanced back at the house. Mabel stood at the window, watching him leave, her hand raised in a small wave. Zeke waved back, wondering what secrets lay behind her gentle smile. Sunday evening, Zeke's throat began to hurt. By bedtime, he had a fever and a cough that made his chest ache. When his alarm went off Monday morning, he could barely lift his head from the pillow. "Mijo, you're burning up," his mother said, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "You can't work today." Zeke tried to protest, but his voice came out as a croak. He fumbled for his phone and called his supervisor. "Sorry to hear that, Williams," Mr. Granger said when Zeke explained. "I'll get Darren to cover your route. Rest up and come back when you're better." After hanging up, Zeke felt a pang of worry. Mabel would be waiting for her package and her hug. She'd be disappointed when he didn't show up. "Mom," he called weakly, "can you hand me my phone again?" Rosa brought it to him with a glass of water and some medicine. "No working while you're sick," she scolded gently. "Just need to text someone," Zeke mumbled. But he realized he didn't have Mabel's number. In a whole year of daily visits, they'd never exchanged contact information. Mabel didn't even have a cell phone as far as he knew. With a sigh, Zeke set his phone down and closed his eyes. He spent Monday in bed, drifting in and out of sleep. His dreams filled with images of Mabel standing by her window, waiting for a truck that never came. By Tuesday morning, Zeke felt well, enough to return to work. His throat still hurt, and his energy was low, but he couldn't stand the thought of Mabel waiting another day. First stop, Thornberry residence, Zeke told himself as he climbed into his delivery truck. When he pulled up to Mabel's house at 10:28 a.m., 6 minutes late, her door opened before he even turned off the engine. Mabel stood in the doorway, her face tight with worry. She was still wearing her robe and slippers, her white hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual neat bun. "Zeke!" she called out as he walked up the path with her package. "Oh, thank goodness!" Zeke was surprised by the relief in her voice. "Morning, Ms. Thornberry. Sorry I'm running a bit late today." "Late? My dear boy, I was worried sick." "Mabel," exclaimed, "you didn't come yesterday, and I thought—" She stopped herself, pressing her thin lips together. "I had a bad cold," Zeke explained. "Didn't you get your delivery yesterday? I had someone covering my route." Mabel waved her hand dismissively. "Some young man came by, but it wasn't the same." She peered at Zeke's face. "You still look unwell. Those circles under your eyes. Come inside and sit down this minute." Before Zeke could protest, Mabel had ushered him into her living room and onto the sofa. "I'll make you some tea with honey," she said, already heading toward the kitchen. "Best thing for a sore throat." While Mabel busied herself in the kitchen, Zeke noticed that yesterday's package sat unopened on the hall table, next to the one he'd just delivered. So she really didn't care about the packages themselves. Mabel returned with a steaming mug that smelled of lemon and honey. "Drink this. My mother swore by it for colds." Zeke accepted the tea with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I'm sorry if I worried you by not showing up yesterday." Mabel sat in her armchair, her eyes fixed on Zeke's face. "That young man who came, Darren, was it? He said you were sick. She twisted her wedding ring around her finger. "I don't like when routines change." There was something in her voice, a fragility that made Zeke's chest tighten. "I'll try to give you more warning next time," he promised. They sat in comfortable silence as Zeke sipped his tea. It did make his throat feel better. "Darren mentioned you seemed upset yesterday," Zeke said after a while. "Said you wouldn't even take the package from him." Mabel's cheeks flushed pink. "Did he? Well, I suppose I was a bit short with him. He wasn't you." The simple honesty of her statement warmed Zeke more than the tea. "I missed our hug, too," he admitted. Mabel smiled, the worry lines around her eyes softening. "Well, we'll just have to make up for it today, won't we?" When it was time for Zeke to leave, Mabel stood at the door and opened her arms wide. Their hug lasted longer than usual, neither wanting to be the first to let go. "You take care of that." "Cold," Mabel instructed as she finally stepped back. "Drink plenty of fluids and get extra rest." "Yes, ma'am," Zeke said with a small salute that made her laugh. Back in his truck, Zeke thought about how distressed Mabel had been by his absence. It seemed extreme for missing just one day. Darren had texted him yesterday. "That old lady on Oak Street really likes you, man. She wouldn't even take the box from me. Looked like she might cry." Why was their daily routine so important to her? What made Zeke special enough that she wouldn't accept a delivery from anyone else? As he drove to his next stop, Zeke couldn't shake the image of Mabel in her robe and slippers, her hair undone, her face tight with worry, as if she'd been waiting by the window all morning, unable to start her day without seeing him. It was more than just a friendly customer-driver relationship. Much more. But what? The question followed Zeke for the rest of the week. Each day, he delivered Mabel's package, they shared their hug, and sometimes he stayed for cookies or tea. But he couldn't stop wondering about the deeper connection he felt between them. Friday's delivery to Mabel's house was heavier than usual. A box labeled Garden Stones that made Zeke's arms ache as he carried it up her walkway. "Oh dear," Mabel said when she opened the door. "That looks heavy." "It is," Zeke confirmed, trying not to show how much effort it took to hold the box. "Where would you like it?" "The back garden, ideally," Mabel said. "But that's asking too much. Just inside the door is fine." Zeke shook his head. "I don't mind taking it to the garden. Lead the way." Mabel hesitated, then nodded. "Through the hallway, then." Zeke followed her through the living room into a narrow hallway lined with more photographs. The box grew heavier with each step, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Just through that door," Mabel said, pointing ahead. As Zeke approached the back door, he stumbled slightly. The corner of the box knocked against a small bookshelf, sending several books tumbling to the floor. "I'm so sorry," Zeke said, setting down the box carefully. "Don't worry about that," Mabel assured him. "I'll pick them up after we deal with this heavy delivery." The backyard was small but beautiful, with neatly trimmed bushes and colorful flowers growing in raised beds. Zeke set the box down on a stone path. "Your garden is amazing," he said, straightening up and stretching his back. Mabel beamed with pride. "Gardening keeps these old hands busy. Now, let me get you some water. You look overheated." While Mabel went to the kitchen, Zeke returned to the hallway to pick up the fallen books. As he knelt down, something caught his eye. A framed photograph that had slipped behind the bookshelf when it was jostled. Zeke carefully pulled out the picture. It showed a young man about his age, maybe a few years younger. He wore what looked like a uniform, some kind of school outfit with an emblem on the pocket. In his hands, he held several paintbrushes, and his smile was wide and proud. Something about the photo made Zeke pause. The young man had dark, curly hair, much like Zeke's own. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, again, just like Zeke's. In fact, the resemblance was striking. If Zeke didn't know better, he might think he was looking at a picture of himself from a few years ago. "I found your water glass," Mabel's voice called from around the corner. Zeke was still staring at the photograph when Mabel entered the hallway. She stopped abruptly, the glass of water in her hand forgotten as her eyes fixed on the picture in Zeke's hand. "I was just picking up the books, and this fell out," Zeke explained quickly. "I'm sorry if I was being nosy." Mabel said nothing. Her face had gone pale, and her hand trembled so badly that water sloshed over the rim of the glass onto the floor. "Ms. Thornberry, are you okay?" Zeke stood up, concerned by her reaction. With surprising quickness, Mabel stepped forward and took the picture from his hands. "It's nothing," she said, her voice tight. "Just an old photograph." "He looks like—" Zeke began. "It's getting late," Mabel interrupted. "You must have other deliveries." The sudden change in her demeanor confused Zeke. She wouldn't meet his eyes as she set the picture face down on a side table. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked. Mabel shook her head, still not looking at him. "No, dear. I'm just tired today. Perhaps we could skip the tea." Zeke felt as if a door had suddenly closed between them. "Of course. I should get going anyway." They walked back to the front door in uncomfortable silence. For the first time in over a year, Mabel didn't open her arms for their hug. She simply signed for the package and gave Zeke a tight smile. "See you Monday," she said, already closing the door before he could respond. Zeke stood on the porch for a moment, stunned by the abrupt dismissal. What had happened? The picture clearly upset her. But why? And why did the young man in the photo look so much like him? All weekend, Zeke couldn't stop thinking about Mabel and the photograph. He even tried to sketch the young man's face from memory, capturing the curly hair and the crinkled eyes. The resemblance to himself was undeniable. Chandri Fyanimut. Monday morning, Zeke was both eager and nervous to see Mabel again. Would she still be upset? Would she explain what had happened? But when he arrived at her house, everything seemed back to normal. Mabel greeted him warmly, invited him in for tea, and gave him their usual hug. There was no mention of Friday's awkward moment or the photograph. Zeke wanted to ask about it, but didn't want to upset her again. Instead, he tried a different approach. "All those pictures on your walls," he said casually, as they sat in the living room. Family members? Mabel nodded, stirring honey into her tea. Most of them, yes. I notice a young man in a lot of them, Zeke continued carefully. Was he related to you? Mabel's spoon paused mid-stir. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she set the spoon down and looked directly at Zeke. My son, she said quietly. His name was Elliot. Was. Past tense. Zeke felt a pang in his chest. He looks about my age in some of the photos, Zeke said gently. He was 23 in the most recent ones. Mabel's voice was steady, but her eyes held a deep sadness. That's as old as he'll ever be. The room felt suddenly still. Zeke didn't know what to say. The grief in Mabel's voice was palpable, even though it was clear that her son had passed away many years ago. I'm so sorry, Zeke finally managed. Mabel nodded once, then stood up abruptly. I just remembered I have a doctor's appointment today. I should get ready. It was clearly a lie, but Zeke didn't call her on it. He understood now why she had reacted so strongly to his finding the photograph, and why she might not want to talk about it. What he still didn't understand was why her son looked so much like him, or why Mabel seemed to need their daily hugs so desperately. As Zeke left Mabel's house that day, he felt he was closer to the truth, but still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. That evening, Zeke couldn't concentrate on anything. His mind kept returning to the photograph of Elliot and Mabel's reaction when he'd found it. You've been quiet tonight, his mother observed as they washed dishes after dinner. Something on your mind? Zeke hesitated, then decided to tell her. One of my customers, the elderly lady I've told you about, Ms. Thornberry, she had a son who died young. Today I saw his picture, and Mom, he looked so much like me it was weird. Rosa's hands stilled in the soapy water. How strange. Did she mention the resemblance? No. Actually, she got really upset when I found the photo. She's never mentioned having a son before, even though I've been delivering to her house for over a year. Rosa dried her hands on a dish towel. Grief affects people differently. Some can't bear to speak of those they've lost. I know, but there's something else going on. She hugs me every day without fail. And when I was sick last week, she was really upset that I didn't show up. Zeke leaned against the counter. I think maybe I remind her of her son. Rosa squeezed his arm gently. That would explain her attachment to you. Perhaps the hugs comfort her. Maybe. But Zeke still felt there was more to the story. I'm going to pay closer attention tomorrow. The next day, Zeke arrived at Mabel's house with a small package and a determination to observe everything more carefully. When Mabel opened the door, he studied her face as she smiled at him. The way her eyes softened when she saw him, the small sigh she always gave during their hug. It wasn't just the happiness of seeing a friendly face. There was something deeper there, something like recognition. Inside, Zeke looked more closely at the photographs on the walls. Now that he knew to look for Elliot, he saw him everywhere. As a baby in Mabel's arms, as a toddler playing in a sandbox, as a young boy holding a paint set, as a teenager standing proudly next to a colorful canvas, and finally, as the young adult in the art school uniform. But there were no pictures of Elliot as an older adult. No graduation photos beyond art school, no wedding pictures, no family of his own. These are wonderful photos, Zeke said, as they had tea. You must have been proud of your son. Mabel's hands tightened around her cup, but her voice remained steady. Very proud. Elliot had a gift for art. His teachers said he was going to be famous someday. Is that his painting stuff in the corner? Zeke asked, Nodding toward the covered easel, Mabel nodded. I keep meaning to donate it all, but somehow I never do. Her eyes grew distant. He loved to paint. Said it was like breathing for him, just like drawing used to be for me, Zeke thought. What happened to him? He asked gently. Mabel set down her teacup. It was a long time ago, she said, not really answering the question. I still miss him every day. Zeke wanted to ask more, but didn't want to push too hard. Instead, he changed the subject to safer topics. The weather, Mabel's garden, a funny story about another customer on his route. By the time he left, things felt normal between them again. But the question of Elliot stayed with him. After finishing his deliveries, Zeke did something he'd never done before. He drove back to the delivery center and asked to speak with his supervisor. What can I do for you, Williams? Mr. Granger asked, looking up from his computer. I was wondering about one of my customers, Mabel Thornberry on Oak Street. How long has she been receiving deliveries? Mr. Granger raised an eyebrow. That's an odd question. Any particular reason you're asking? Just curious, Zeke said. She gets packages almost every day, but never seems to open them. Mr. Granger typed something into his computer. Looks like she's been a regular customer for, over 3 years now. Almost daily deliveries, mostly small items. Garden supplies, books, craft materials. He looked up at Zeke. Is there a problem with her deliveries? No problem, Zeke assured him. I was just wondering. 3 years of daily deliveries. That meant Mabel had been requesting packages long before Zeke started this route. Why would an elderly woman order things nearly every day if she wasn't using them? The next morning, Zeke paid even closer attention during his visit to Mabel's house. He noticed things he'd missed before. How all the unopened packages were stacked neatly in a spare bedroom, dozens of them with their labels still intact. How Mabel always steered conversations away from certain topics, especially anything about her son or Zeke's resemblance to him. How she seemed to treasure their time together, even if it was just a few minutes each day. When Mabel hugged him goodbye, Zeke noticed again the small sigh she always gave, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding. And he realized something else. Their hugs weren't just a friendly gesture. They seemed necessary to her somehow, like water or air. After a week of careful observation, Zeke felt he understood more about Mabel and her attachment to him. She obviously saw something of her son in him, the physical resemblance, perhaps his age, maybe even his interest in art. The daily deliveries weren't about the packages. They were about ensuring that someone, specifically someone who reminded her of Elliot, would visit her every day. But that still didn't explain everything. Why did their hug seem to mean so much to her? And why had she been ordering daily deliveries even before Zeke started on this route? On Friday, Zeke arrived at Mabel's house to find her looking at a calendar on the wall. She quickly turned away when he entered, but not before he noticed that she'd been crying. Ms. Thornberry, is everything okay? He asked. Yes, of course, she said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. Just some allergies acting up. But Zeke had seen the calendar. A date next week was circled in red. When Mabel went to the kitchen to get their tea, he looked more closely. The circled date had E48 written beside it. E48. Elliot would have been 48 years old next week. When Mabel returned with the tea, Zeke gently asked, Is next Thursday a special day? Mabel's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray. Why do you ask? I noticed it's circled on your calendar. Mabel was quiet for a long moment. It's Elliot's birthday, she finally said. He would have been 48. The confirmation made Zeke's chest tighten. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Those days can be hard." Mabel nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. 25 years, and it still feels like yesterday sometimes. She looked directly at Zeke, something vulnerable in her gaze. "You remind me of him, you know. Not just your looks, but your kindness, your talent for art." It was the first time she directly acknowledged the resemblance. "That's why the hugs are important to you?" Zeke said, understanding dawning. Mabel dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. "Silly old woman, aren't I? Clinging to a young man who reminds me of my son." "Not silly at all," Zeke assured her. "I don't mind." They finished their tea in comfortable silence. When it was time for Zeke to leave, Mabel seemed to want to say more, but in the end, she just gave him their usual hug. As Zeke drove to his next delivery, his mind was full of questions. What had happened to Elliot 25 years ago? Why did Mabel never mention how he died? And why did she look at Zeke sometimes as if she wanted to tell him something important? Something beyond the fact that he resembled her son. There was still a missing piece to this puzzle, and Zeke was determined to find it. All weekend, Zeke couldn't stop thinking about Mabel, Elliot, and the upcoming birthday. By Sunday evening, he had made a decision. After dinner, he pulled out his old sketchbook and several sharp pencils. "Drawing again?" his mother asked, pleased surprise in her voice as she peeked into his room. "Yeah," Zeke said, already focused on the blank page. "Something important." He worked late into the night, carefully creating what he hoped would be the perfect gift for Mabel. Monday and Tuesday passed normally. Zeke delivered Mabel's packages. They shared their hugs and sometimes tea, but he didn't mention Elliot or the upcoming birthday. He could tell Mabel was growing more somber as Thursday approached. Her smiles seemed forced, and dark circles appeared under her eyes as if she wasn't sleeping well. On Wednesday, when Zeke arrived at Mabel's house, something felt different. The curtains were drawn, and Mabel took longer than usual to answer the door. When she finally appeared, her eyes were red and puffy. "Miss Thornberry, are you okay?" Zeke asked, immediately concerned. "Just a difficult day, dear," she said, her voice hoarse. "Come in, come in." Inside, Zeke noticed a photo album open on the coffee table. Different from the one he'd seen before. Mabel followed his gaze and sighed. "I've been looking at old pictures," she admitted. "Not always wise the day before." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Zeke set her package down and took a seat on the sofa. "Would you like to show me some?" he asked gently. Mabel hesitated, then nodded. She sat beside him and pulled the album onto her lap. "These are from Elliot's art school days," she said, turning pages slowly. The photographs showed a young man full of life and creativity. In one, Elliot stood proudly next to a large canvas covered with vibrant colors. In another, he sat at an easel, concentration on his face as he worked. The resemblance between Elliot and Zeke was even more striking in these casual photos. He was really talented, Zeke observed, studying the glimpses of artwork visible in the pictures. "The best in his class," Mabel said, a hint of pride breaking through her sadness. His professors said he had a unique style, a way of seeing the world that was all his own. She turned another page. This was taken just a week before. Again, she couldn't finish. The photo showed Elliot grinning broadly, holding up a letter. "What was he celebrating?" Zeke asked. Mabel's finger traced the edge of the photo. He'd just been selected for a prestigious art exhibition. Only 3 students from the entire country were chosen. It was his big break. Her voice cracked. He never got to see his work displayed. Zeke, felt a lump forming in his throat. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thornberry." "Call me Mabel, please," she said quietly. "After all this time, you feel like—" She stopped herself. "Like what?" Zeke prompted when she didn't continue. Mabel closed the album and placed it on the coffee table. "Like someone I can trust," she finished, though Zeke suspected that wasn't what she had originally intended to say. They sat in silence for a moment. Zeke wanted to ask how Elliot died but didn't want to cause Mabel more pain. Instead, he asked, "Will you visit his grave tomorrow?" Mabel nodded. "Every birthday without fail. I bring blue balloons, they were his favorite color, and tell him about my year." She gave a sad smile. "Silly, talking to a headstone, but it helps." "It's not silly at all," Zeke assured her. As he prepared to leave, Mabel seemed reluctant to end their visit. At the door, she held onto his hand a moment longer than usual. "Tomorrow will be hard," she said, almost to herself. 25 years, and it never gets easier. Their hug felt different too, tighter, more desperate somehow. When they pulled apart, Mabel looked like she wanted to say something important, but then shook her head slightly. "See you Friday," Zeke said. "And take care of yourself tomorrow, okay?" Mabel nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "Thank you, dear." Driving away, Zeke made his decision. He wouldn't wait until Friday. Tomorrow was too important. That night, he finished his special project and carefully wrapped it in blue paper. His mother watched him with curious eyes, but didn't ask questions when he said he needed to make a stop before work in the morning. Thursday dawned clear and bright, almost mockingly cheerful for such a sad anniversary. Zeke arrived at Mabel's house much earlier than his usual delivery time, parking his own car instead of the delivery truck. He wasn't surprised to find Mabel already dressed and ready at 8 a.m. She wore a simple navy blue dress and held a small bunch of blue balloons. "Zeke!" she exclaimed when she opened the door. "What are you doing here so early? And where's your truck?" "I'm not here as your delivery driver today," Zeke said. "I wanted to give you something before you visit Elliot." He held out the wrapped package. Mabel looked at it with surprise, then carefully took it from him. "You didn't have to bring me anything," she said. "I wanted to," Zeke assured her. "Go ahead, open it." With trembling fingers, Mabel unwrapped the blue paper. Inside was a framed drawing, Zeke's best work in years. It showed Elliot as he might have looked at 48 years old, based on the photographs Zeke had seen. The face was older, with laugh, lines around the eyes and touches of gray at the temples, but it was unmistakably Elliot, with the same bright smile and artistic spark in his eyes that had been evident in his youth. Mabel stared at the drawing, her hand covering her mouth. For a long moment, she said nothing, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I hope it's okay," Zeke said nervously. "I thought maybe you'd like to see how he might have looked today, on his birthday." When Mabel finally looked up, her eyes held such raw emotion that Zeke felt his own eyes filling with tears. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." She clutched the drawing to her chest, then suddenly reached out and pulled Zeke into a tight embrace. "How did you know?" she asked through her tears. "How did you know this was exactly what I needed?" Zeke hugged her back, feeling her small frame shaking with emotion. "Just a guess," he said softly. When they pulled apart, Mabel kept one hand on his arm, as if afraid he might disappear. "Would you like to come with me?" she asked hesitantly. "To visit him? I think he would like that." The request surprised Zeke, but he nodded without hesitation. "I'd be honored." As they walked to Mabel's old car, Zeke carrying the drawing and Mabel holding her blue balloons, He sensed that today would finally reveal the missing piece of the puzzle. Mabel's car was a well-maintained blue Buick at least 20 years old. "Elliot helped me pick this out," she explained as they got in. "He said blue was more cheerful than black or gray." The drive to Peaceful Pines Cemetery took about 15 minutes. Mabel was quiet, occasionally glancing at the drawing Zeke had made, which now rested carefully on the back seat. "Thank you for coming with me," she said, as they turned through the cemetery gates. "I usually do this alone." "I'm glad you asked me," Zeke replied truthfully. The cemetery was beautiful. Rolling green hills dotted with trees, well-tended flower beds, and pathways winding between the graves. Mabel drove slowly along the narrow road, finally stopping near a large oak tree. "This is it," she said softly. Elliot's grave was marked by a simple headstone of polished gray granite. It read, "Elliot James Thornberry, 1976, 1999, beloved son. Every canvas is a journey all its own." Zeke noticed fresh flowers already in the vase by the headstone. "Someone else has been here," he observed. "The groundskeeper," Mabel explained. "Mr. Jenkins. He's been here since before Elliot died. Always makes sure there are fresh flowers for birthdays and the anniversary." Mabel spread a small blanket on the grass and carefully arranged the blue balloons, tying them to a small stake beside the headstone. She placed Zeke's drawing against the stone, propping it up so it faced them. "Hello, my sweet boy," she said to the grave. "Happy birthday. 48 years old today. Can you believe it?" Her voice was surprisingly steady. "I brought someone special with me this time. This is Zeke. He's the young man I've told you about." Zeke felt a strange emotion wash over him as Mabel spoke to her son as if he could hear her. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about her unwavering connection to Elliot, even after 25 years. "Zeke drew this picture of you," Mabel continued, touching the frame gently. "See how handsome you would have been? He captured your smile perfectly." As Mabel continued her one-sided conversation, telling Elliot about her garden and her year, Zeke noticed an elderly man in a groundskeeper's uniform watching them from a distance. The man nodded respectfully when Zeke caught his eye. After about 20 minutes, Mabel fell silent. She sat with her hand resting on the grass over Elliot's grave, her eyes closed. "Would you like a moment alone with him?" Zeke asked quietly. Mabel opened her eyes and shook her head. "No, stay. There's something important I need to do today, and I think you should be here." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. It was addressed simply to Elliot in her neat handwriting. "Every year on his birthday, I write him a letter," she explained. "I tell him things that are too hard to say out loud. Then I leave it with Mr. Jenkins, who makes sure it's taken care of." Mabel looked at the envelope in her hands, then back at Zeke. "This year's letter is different. I think it's time for the truth to be shared." Zeke's heart beat faster. "The truth? About why your visits mean so much to me. About why I started ordering those packages 3 years ago." Mabel took a deep breath. "Zeke, after you leave today, I'd like you to mail something for me." She pulled out a second envelope from her purse. This one was addressed to someone named Elliot Thornberry at the cemetery office. "Inside is a copy of my letter to Elliot and a note asking Mr. Jenkins to share it with you the next time you come. Here." Mabel's hands trembled slightly. "I've been trying to tell you for months now, but I never found the courage." "Tell me what?" Zeke asked gently. Mabel looked at him, tears filling her eyes again. "The real reason you remind me of Elliot. It's not just your appearance or your artistic talent. It's something much more Significant. She glanced at her watch and sighed. But I need to do this properly. Mr. Jenkins is expecting me in his office at 10 to sign the yearly maintenance agreement for Elliot's plot. When I finish, I'll have him give you a tour of the Memorial Garden. He's worked here for decades and knows all the history. And then, Zeke prompted, and then, if you come back here next week, he'll have my letter for you. It explains everything. Mabel reached out and squeezed his hand. I know it seems strange to do it this way, but I need time to find the right words. Writing has always been easier for me than speaking about difficult things. Zeke wanted to press for more information right then, but something in Mabel's expression stopped him. This was her way of sharing her truth, and he would respect it. I'll come back, he promised. They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then Mabel carefully placed her letter beside the headstone, tucking it under a small stone to keep it from blowing away. Until next year, my sweet boy, she whispered, touching the headstone one last time before standing up. As they walked toward the cemetery office, Zeke spotted the groundskeeper approaching Elliot's grave to collect Mabel's letter. The elderly man handled it with obvious care and respect. Mr. Jenkins greeted them at the office door, his weathered face kind beneath a shock of white hair. Mrs. Thornberry, right on time as always, he said, shaking her hand. And you've brought a friend this year. This is Zeke Williams, Mabel introduced him. Zeke, this is Harold Jenkins, the best groundskeeper Peaceful Pines has ever had. Going on 38 years now, Mr. Jenkins said with a modest smile. I've known Mrs. Thornberry for 25 of those years, ever since. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. It's all right, Mabel assured him. Zeke knows about Elliot. Mr. Jenkins nodded, his eyes studying Zeke's face with interest. The resemblance is remarkable, he murmured, almost to himself. Inside the office, Mabel signed some paperwork while Mr. Jenkins made small talk with Zeke about the cemetery's history. When she finished, Mabel turned to Zeke. Mr. Jenkins is going to show you the Memorial Garden while I finish up some private business here, she said. I'll meet you by the car in about 30 minutes. This way, young man, Mr. Jenkins said, holding the door open. As they walked among the beautiful flower beds and memorial plaques, Zeke couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. Mr. Jenkins, how did Elliot die? He asked directly. Mabel never talks about it. The groundskeeper glanced at him, then looked away. It was a car accident. Rainy night, slick roads. He was driving back from art school. He sighed heavily. Just 23 years old. Such a waste. You knew him? Zeke asked. Not personally, no. But I remember the night it happened. And I've watched his mother come here every Sunday for 25 years without fail. Mr. Jenkins stopped walking and turned to face Zeke. You know, in all those years, you're the first person she's ever brought with her. The significance of this wasn't lost on Zeke. I deliver packages to her house. We've become friends. Mr. Jenkins nodded slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. More than friends, I'd wager, at least in her mind. He hesitated, then added, She left something for you in my care, said you'd be back for it next week. Yes, she mentioned that. Whatever it is, it's important to her. I've never seen Mrs. Thornberry so at peace. Mr. Jenkins started walking again. She's a special lady who's carried a heavy burden for many years. As they completed their tour of the garden, Zeke felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread about the contents of Mabel's letter. What truth was so important that she needed to share it in this roundabout way? When they returned to the car, Mabel was already waiting, her face calm despite the emotional morning. "Ready to go?" she asked. On the drive back, Zeke's mind raced with questions, but he kept them to himself. Mabel had chosen her way of revealing her secret, and he would wait. What he didn't know was that fate had other plans. After dropping Mabel off at her house, Zeke called his supervisor to explain his absence. Mr. Granger wasn't happy, but agreed to let Zeke work a later shift to make up for the missed deliveries. By noon, Zeke was behind the wheel of his delivery truck, trying to focus on his job while his mind kept returning to Mabel, Elliot, and the mysterious letter waiting for him at the cemetery. The afternoon passed in a blur of packages and signatures. Zeke was on his last delivery when his truck sputtered and then stalled completely. He coasted to the side of the road and tried restarting the engine, but nothing happened. "Perfect," Zeke muttered, pulling out his phone to call for assistance. The delivery center dispatcher told him it would be at least an hour before a mechanic could reach him. With nothing to do but wait, Zeke decided to stretch his legs. Looking around, he realized he was only a few blocks from Oak Street, Mabel's neighborhood. Without really thinking about it, he began walking in that direction. He wasn't planning to visit her. He just wanted to be somewhere familiar while he waited. As Zeke rounded the corner onto Oak Street, he could see Mabel's white house with blue shutters in the distance. The evening sun cast long shadows across the front yard, and through the living room window he could see a light on inside. He was about to turn around when something caught his eye. Mabel was visible through the window, sitting at her small writing desk. Even from a distance, Zeke could tell she was crying. Her shoulders shook as she bent over what appeared to be a piece of paper. Zeke hesitated. Should he approach and check on her? Or would that be intruding on a private moment? Before he could decide, Mabel stood up from the desk, wiping her eyes. She folded the paper she'd been writing on and placed it in an envelope. Then she left the room, disappearing from Zeke's view. Concerned, Zeke walked slowly toward the house. He didn't want to spy on Mabel, but he was worried about her emotional state after the cemetery visit. Perhaps she needed company. As he approached the front path, he could see that Mabel's car was gone from the driveway. She must have gone out again after he'd dropped her off earlier. Zeke was about to leave when he noticed something strange. Mabel's front door was slightly ajar. That didn't seem like her. She was always careful about security. "Ms. Thornberry?" Zeke called, knocking gently on the door frame. "Mabel, are you home?" No answer. The house was silent. Concerned that something might be wrong, Zeke pushed the door open a bit further. "Hello? Mabel?" Still no response. Zeke stepped inside, feeling uncomfortable about entering without permission, but worried that Mabel might have fallen or become ill. "Mabel? It's Zeke. Are you okay?" he called louder. The living room was exactly as it had been that morning. Zeke's drawing of the older Elliot was propped on the mantel, carefully positioned between two framed photographs. The writing desk in the corner caught his attention. An envelope sat on it, sealed, but not addressed. Next to the envelope was a small notebook, open to a page filled with Mabel's handwriting. At the top of the page, she had written, "Draft, letter to cemetery office about Zeke." Zeke knew he shouldn't read it. This was obviously private, but his eyes were drawn to his own name, and before he could stop himself, he was scanning the page. "Dear Mr. Jenkins," the letter began. "As we discussed, I am writing to formally request that you share the enclosed letter with Zeke Williams when he visits next week. It contains information about a connection between Zeke and my son, Elliot, that I have only recently found the courage to reveal." Zeke's heart beat faster. "What connection?" 3 years ago," the letter continued, "I saw Zeke's name tag during a delivery and recognized his unusual name, Ezekiel, the same name as the truck driver who held my Elliot's hand as he died. I have never forgotten what Mr. Thomas told me about his son being named after that truck driver. Zeke felt dizzy suddenly. The truck driver who held Elliot's hand as he died? His father had been a truck driver, but surely it couldn't be? When I learned that Mr. Williams had passed away, I was determined to meet his son. I began ordering daily deliveries, hoping that eventually Zeke would be assigned to my route. When he finally appeared at my door 1 year ago, the resemblance to Elliot took my breath away. Zeke had to sit down. The room seemed to be spinning around him. His father had never mentioned being present at a young man's death. But then again, his father hadn't shared much about his work experiences, especially difficult ones. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped Zeke back to reality. He quickly moved away from the desk, feeling guilty for reading Mabel's private letter. But his mind was reeling from what he had discovered. The front door opened fully, and Mabel entered, carrying a small paper bag from the pharmacy. She froze when she saw Zeke standing in her living room. "Zeke, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I'm sorry for coming in uninvited," Zeke said quickly. "Your door was open, and I was worried something might be wrong. My delivery truck broke down nearby, and I was waiting for help." Mabel set down her bag and closed the door behind her. "I must have forgotten to latch it properly when I left to pick up my prescription. Old age making me forgetful." She studied his face. "You look upset. Is everything all right?" Zeke couldn't maintain the pretense. "I saw the letter on your desk," he admitted. "I know I shouldn't have read it, but I saw my name and—" Mabel's face paled. "Oh." She moved to the sofa and sat down heavily. "I see. Mabel, what did you mean about a truck driver holding Elliot's hand? Was that my father?" Zeke's voice cracked with emotion. Mabel took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Yes, Samuel Williams. He was driving his route the night of Elliot's accident. He saw the crash happen and stopped to help. According to the police report, he stayed with Elliot until the ambulance arrived, but it was too late." Her eyes filled with tears. "Your father came to Elliot's funeral. He told me that Elliot wasn't alone at the end, that he held his hand and talked to him so he wouldn't be scared." Zeke felt tears running down his own cheeks now. "Dad never told me about this. Some burdens are too heavy to share," Mabel said softly, "even with those we love." She reached for a tissue box and offered it to Zeke. "At the funeral, your father mentioned that his wife was pregnant, and they had decided to name their son Ezekiel. It was an unusual name, one I remembered. After my dad died," Zeke said slowly, piecing it together. "You saw his obituary?" Mabel nodded. 3 years ago. It mentioned his long career as a truck driver and his surviving family, wife Rosa and son Ezekiel. I knew it had to be the same man. I felt I needed to meet you, to thank the family of the man who had shown such kindness to my son in his final moments. So, the packages, the daily deliveries," Zeke began, "were my way of trying to connect with you," Mabel finished. "I kept ordering things, hoping eventually you would be the one to deliver them. When you finally appeared at my door last year," she paused, her voice breaking, "you looked so much like my Elliot. Same age as he was when he died. Same curly hair, same smile, even the same interest in art. It felt like a sign." Zeke sat beside her on the sofa, trying to process everything. "And the hugs?" Mabel twisted her hands in her lap. "A selfish old woman's comfort," she admitted, "but also my way of thanking you, and through you, your father, for what he did for Elliot. Every hug was for both of you. The pieces finally fit together in Zeke's mind. Why Mabel had been so upset when he missed a delivery. Why she treasured their brief daily visits. Why she'd been ordering packages for years before. He started on the route. I wish Dad had told me, Zeke said quietly, about being there for Elliot. Some memories are too painful to revisit, Mabel replied. Your father carried the weight of that night with him. I suspect it affected him deeply. Zeke remembered how his father would sometimes fall into somber moods, especially on rainy nights. Had he been thinking about Elliot during those times? Is this what you were going to tell me in your letter? Zeke asked. Mabel nodded. I've been trying to find the courage for months now. Every time I thought I was ready, the words wouldn't come. She reached out and took his hand. I didn't want to burden you with the past, but I also thought you deserved to know about your father's final act of kindness for my son. They sat in silence for a long moment, both lost in thought. Thank you for telling me, Zeke finally said. And thank you for the hugs. They've meant a lot to me, too. Mabel squeezed his hand. You're so like him, you know. Not just in looks, but in spirit. The same kindness, the same thoughtfulness. Like Elliot? Zeke asked. Like both of them, Mabel corrected gently. Elliot and your father. Good men, both taken too soon. Outside, a horn honked. The mechanic had arrived for Zeke's truck. I have to go, Zeke said reluctantly, but I'll be back tomorrow with your delivery. And a hug? Mabel asked, a small smile breaking through her tears. Definitely a hug, Zeke promised. Zeke couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying Mabel's revelation about his father. How had Dad never mentioned being with a young man as he died? It seemed like such an important moment, such a profound experience. Around midnight, Zeke got up and quietly opened the bottom drawer of his dresser. Inside was a wooden box containing his father's personal items, his wedding ring, his pocket watch, and a small leather journal that Zeke had never found the courage to read. With trembling hands, Zeke opened the journal. Most entries were brief notes about routes, weather conditions, or mechanical issues with his truck. But as Zeke flipped through the pages, a date jumped out at him. May 17th, 1999. The handwriting on this page was different, shakier, more hurried. Zeke began to read. Rain tonight. Bad accident on Route 16. Young man in a small red car skidded off the road. I stopped to help. His name was Elliot, an art student. Just a kid, really. Stayed with him until the ambulance came, but I could tell he wasn't going to make it. Held his hand so he wouldn't be alone. He asked me to tell his mother he loved her. Said he was sorry he wouldn't finish his painting. I promised I would tell her. The strangest thing, when I told Rosa about it later, she suggested we name our baby Ezekiel if it's a boy. Same name as mine, like passing something on. Zeke felt tears running down his cheeks. His father had carried this memory all those years. The next morning, Zeke asked his supervisor for a favor. I need to make a personal stop before my regular route, he explained. Mr. Granger looked skeptical, but eventually nodded. Don't make a habit of it, Williams. Zeke drove to a flower shop and bought a small potted plant with blue flowers, then headed to Peaceful Pines Cemetery. Mr. Jenkins was trimming hedges near the entrance and looked surprised to see Zeke so soon. Didn't expect you back until next week, he said, leaning on his clippers. Something came up, Zeke replied. I need to visit Elliot. Mr. Jenkins nodded knowingly. Mrs. Thornberry told you then? Yes. Did you know all along? The groundskeeper shrugged. Bits and pieces. She talks to me sometimes when she visits. I knew there was some connection between you and Elliot through your father." Zeke walked to Elliot's grave alone. The blue balloons from yesterday were still there, moving gently in the morning breeze. He placed the potted plant beside the headstone and stood for a moment, not sure what to say. "I didn't know my dad was with you," he finally said out loud. "He never told me. But I found his journal last night. He wrote about you, about promising to tell your mom that you loved her." Zeke felt strange talking to a headstone, but somehow it also felt right. "I'm glad he was there for you. I wish," Zeke's voice caught, "I wish you'd had more time for your art, for everything." After a few more minutes of silence, Zeke walked back to his truck. He had deliveries to make, including one very important package for Mabel Thornberry. When Zeke arrived at Mabel's house, she was waiting by the window as always. But today, when she opened the door, there was a new openness in her expression. The relief of a secret finally shared. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," Zeke replied, handing her the small package he'd brought. "I stopped by the cemetery earlier, brought some blue flowers for Elliot." Mabel's eyes widened in surprise. "You did?" Zeke nodded. "I also found my dad's journal last night. He wrote about the accident, about Elliot. He mentioned promising to tell you that Elliot loved you." Tears filled Mabel's eyes. "He did tell me. At the funeral. Those were the last words my son spoke, according to your father." They moved inside, and for once, the package was forgotten on the hall table. In the living room, Zeke noticed his drawing of the older Elliot had been given a place of honor on the mantel. "I've been thinking all night," Zeke said as they sat down, "about my dad, Elliot, and everything that connects us." "And?" Mabel prompted gently. "My supervisor mentioned a promotion coming up. More money, better hours. I was considering taking it," Zeke said. "But last night I realized something. I don't want to spend my life delivering packages." "What do you want to do?" Mabel asked. "I want to go back to art school. Finish what I started before Dad got sick." Zeke took a deep breath. "Life is too short to put dreams on hold indefinitely. I think Elliot would understand that better than anyone." Mabel nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "He would. He absolutely would." "It won't be easy," Zeke continued. "I'll still need to help Mom with bills, so I'll have to work part-time while taking classes." "You'll find a way," Mabel said confidently. "Talent and determination usually do." They talked for almost an hour about Elliot's art, about Zeke's sketches, about the strange threads of fate that had brought them together. For the first time, their conversation flowed without the weight of unspoken secrets. As Zeke prepared to leave, Mabel suddenly remembered something. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into another room. She returned carrying a wooden box with EJT carved on the lid. "These were Elliot's art supplies," she explained, holding out the box. "His special brushes, his favorite paints. They've been sitting unused for 25 years. I think he would want you to have them." Zeke stared at the box, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Mabel, I can't—" "Please," she interrupted. "It would mean so much to me to see them being used again. To see his passion for art living on through you." Slowly, reverently, Zeke accepted the box. It was heavier than he expected, filled with high-quality supplies that had been carefully preserved. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Mabel assured him. "Just promise me you'll use them." "I promise," Zeke said, the words feeling like a solemn vow. Their hug goodbye was different today. Not desperate or sad, but warm and genuine. A hug between people connected by something deeper than daily deliveries. "See you tomorrow?" Mabel asked as Zeke stepped onto the porch. "Actually, I have the afternoon off," Zeke replied. "I thought maybe I could bring my sketchbook over and you could tell me more about Elliot's painting techniques. If that's okay." Mabel's face lit up. "I'd love that. I'll make cookies." As Zeke walked to his truck, carrying Elliot's art supplies, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the box in his hands wasn't a burden. It was a gift, a legacy, a second chance. He looked back at Mabel standing in the doorway, waving goodbye, and knew that his decision was right. Not just for him, but for all of them. Mabel, his mother, his father's memory, and even Elliot. Some connections were too important to ignore. Over the next few days, Zeke spent every free moment drawing. The wooden box of Elliot's art supplies sat open beside him, the brushes and paints carefully arranged. He hadn't used them yet. It felt like a big step, one he wasn't quite ready for. Instead, he filled pages of his sketchbook with pencil drawings. He sketched his father based on old photographs, trying to capture the kindness in his eyes. He drew his mother, the strength and weariness in her face. And he drew Mabel, not just her appearance, but the spirit behind her gentle smile. When Saturday afternoon arrived, Zeke gathered his sketchbook and headed to Mabel's house. This wasn't a delivery visit, it was a friendship visit, the first of what he hoped would be many. Mabel had prepared for his arrival. The small table in the corner of the living room had been cleared of dust and clutter. The white sheet had been removed from the easel, which now held a blank canvas. Beside it stood another easel, smaller, newer, that Zeke had never seen before. "I ordered it online," Mabel explained, following his gaze. "Thought you might need somewhere to work." "You didn't have to do that," Zeke said, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Nonsense," Mabel waved away his protest. "This house needs more art being created in it. Elliot would approve." They spent the afternoon looking through albums of Elliot's artwork, photographs of paintings he'd created, sketches he'd done as a child, even a few half-finished canvases Mabel had preserved. Elliot's style was vibrant and emotional, full of bold colors and strong lines. He never doubted himself. When he painted, Mabel recalled fondly, even as a small boy, he would just pick up a brush and go for it. "No fear," Zeke nodded, understanding. "That's what I struggle with sometimes. The blank page can be intimidating." Elliot used to say that the worst thing an artist can do is nothing. Mabel replied, "Better to make a mistake than to make nothing at all." As evening approached, Zeke finally worked up the courage to ask about the covered painting he'd noticed in the corner during his early visits, the one Mabel had always steered conversations away from. "There's one painting you haven't shown me," he said carefully. "The one that's covered in the corner." Mabel's expression grew somber. "Yes, that's the last one. The one he never finished." She led Zeke to the corner and carefully removed the sheet. Beneath it was a half-completed canvas, the beginnings of what would have been a stunning landscape. Rolling hills, a winding river, and the suggestion of mountains in the distance. The sky was barely started, just a wash of pale blue. The foreground remained blank white canvas. He was working on this when Mabel couldn't finish the sentence. The art exhibition that selected his work. This was going to be his centerpiece. He called it The Journey Home. Zeke studied the painting with an artist's eye. Even unfinished, it showed remarkable talent. The composition was balanced, the perspective perfect, the colors harmonious. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. even incomplete. Like his life, Mabel said softly. She replaced the sheet carefully. I've never been able to look at it for long. Too many what-ifs. They were quiet for a moment, both lost in thought. I registered for classes today, Zeke finally said, breaking the silence. 2 nights a week to start, plus weekends. I'll keep working part-time at the delivery company. Mabel's face brightened. That's wonderful news. When do you begin? Next month. Fall semester. Zeke took a deep breath. I also told my mom about everything. About Dad being with Elliot when he died. About our connection to you. She wants to meet you. I'd like that very much, Mabel said, her eyes misting. We share something important, your mother and I. We both loved men who showed great kindness in difficult moments. Zeke nodded, then glanced at his watch. I should get going. Mom's expecting me for dinner. At the door, they shared their usual hug, which had become more meaningful since their secrets had been revealed. Before you go, Mabel said suddenly, I have something for you. She handed him a small, gift-wrapped package. Inside was a keychain with a paintbrush charm. It was Elliot's, she explained. His first art teacher gave it to him when he was 12. Said it was to remind him to make time for his art every day, no matter what. Zeke ran his finger over the small metal brush, feeling the weight of its meaning. Thank you. I'll treasure it. And use it to unlock many doors, Mabel added with a smile. Driving home, Zeke thought about everything that had happened since he discovered the photograph of Elliot. The connections that had been revealed, the decisions he'd made, the friendship that had deepened. None of it would have happened if his truck hadn't broken down that day, if he hadn't seen Mabel's letter. Some might call it coincidence. Zeke preferred to think of it as something else, something more meaningful. When he arrived home, his mother was waiting with news. Mr. Granger called, she said, as Zeke walked through the door. He wants to talk to you about your schedule, now that you're going back to school. I'll call him back after dinner, Zeke promised. Rosa studied her son's face. You look happy, mijo. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. I am. Zeke realized it was true. Despite the emotional revelations of the past week, he felt lighter somehow, more purposeful. I feel like I'm finally on the right path. Your father would be proud, Rosa said, squeezing his hand. So proud. After dinner, Zeke called Mr. Granger. To his surprise, his supervisor was supportive of his decision to return to school. We can work around your class schedule, Mr. Granger assured him. Keep you on the Oak Street route in the mornings. Don't want to disappoint your biggest fan. Thanks, Zeke said, relieved. That means a lot. Later that night, as Zeke was getting ready for bed, he found himself standing in front of the wooden box of Elliot's art supplies. Slowly, reverently, he lifted one of the brushes. It felt right in his hand, as if it had been waiting for him. Tomorrow, Zeke decided, he would finally use the paints. He would create something new, something that honored both his own talent and the legacy he had unexpectedly inherited. Tomorrow would be a birthday of sorts, the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Zeke woke early, feeling a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. Today, he would paint for the first time since his father fell ill. Today, he would use Elliot's supplies. After breakfast, he set up a makeshift studio in the corner of his bedroom. A small table by the window for natural light, a chair, and a blank canvas he'd bought yesterday after leaving Mabel's house. Zeke opened the wooden box reverently. Inside, Elliot's brushes were arranged by size, the bristles still in good condition despite the years. The tubes of paint were organized by color, some still sealed, others partially used. There was also a well-loved palette with dried remnants of Elliot's last painting session. For a long moment, Zeke just looked at everything, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. Then he selected a brush, medium-sized, with a comfortable wooden handle worn smooth by Elliot's grip. He squeezed small amounts of blue, yellow, and white onto the clean side of the palette. His first brush stroke was hesitant, almost timid, but as the paint glided across the canvas, something shifted inside him. The second stroke was more confident. By the third, he had forgotten his nervousness entirely. Hours passed without Zeke noticing. He was lost in the rhythm of painting, in the joy of creating something new. The image emerging on the canvas was a sunrise over hills that looked surprisingly like the landscape in Elliot's unfinished painting, but complete, vibrant, alive with golden light. When Zeke finally stepped back to look at his work, he was startled to see it was mid-afternoon. His mother stood in the doorway, watching him with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, mijo," she said softly. "You have a gift." Zeke looked at the painting through her eyes. It wasn't perfect. His technique was rusty after years without practice. But there was something honest and hopeful about it. Something that felt right. "Thanks, Mom," he said, setting down the brush. "I lost track of time." Rosa smiled. "That's how you know you're doing what you love." She gestured to the painting. "Will you show this to Mabel?" Zeke nodded. "Tomorrow, during my delivery." That evening, Zeke carefully cleaned Elliot's brushes and closed the wooden box. The painting needed to dry overnight before he could transport it safely. As he got ready for bed, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Today had been more than just a return to painting. It had been a connection to something larger than himself. Monday morning's delivery route seemed to crawl by as Zeke anticipated his stop at Mabel's house. He had wrapped the dry painting carefully and placed it in the cab of his truck, separate from the regular packages. When he finally pulled up to the White House with blue shutters, Zeke felt a flutter of nervousness. What if Mabel didn't like his painting? What if using Elliot's supplies upset her more than it pleased her? But when Mabel opened the door, her smile was as warm as ever. "Good morning, Zeke. Right on time." "Morning, Mabel. I have something for you today, besides your regular package." Zeke returned to his truck and carefully retrieved the wrapped painting. Mabel's eyes widened as he carried it up the walkway. "What's this?" "Something I made yesterday," Zeke said, suddenly shy. "My first painting in years." Inside, Zeke propped the wrapped canvas against the sofa and handed Mabel her package. She set it aside without even glancing at it, her attention fixed on Zeke's gift. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the wrapping. Zeke nodded, his heart beating faster as Mabel carefully removed the paper. When the painting was fully revealed, Mabel gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared at the sunrise landscape with tears welling in her eyes. Zeke couldn't tell if they were happy tears or sad ones. "I used Elliot's supplies," he explained, breaking the silence. "His brushes, his paints." It felt important somehow. Mabel reached out and touched the canvas gently, as if she could feel her son's presence in the artwork. "The sunrise," she whispered. "It's over the same hills as Elliot's unfinished painting." Zeke hadn't consciously planned that connection, but he wasn't surprised by it. "I guess it was in my mind after seeing his work." "But you completed it," Mabel said, her voice thick with emotion. "You painted what he couldn't." The tears spilled over then, running down Mabel's cheeks in silent streams. Zeke worried he had upset her, but before he could apologize, Mabel pulled him into a tight hug. "Thank you," she said through her tears. Thank you for bringing his art back to life." Zeke hugged her back, feeling his own eyes grow wet. The supplies were just sitting there unused. I thought maybe he'd want someone to use them again." When they pulled apart, Mabel wiped her eyes and looked at the painting again. "It's beautiful, Zeke. Truly beautiful. And yes, I think Elliot would be pleased." "I want you to have it," Zeke said. "If you want it, that is." "Want it?" Mabel repeated, her voice breaking. "Of course I want it. It's precious to me." She looked around the room, then pointed to the wall beside Elliot's photographs. "It belongs right there, where I can see it every day." They hung the painting together, stepping back to admire how the morning light caught the golden hues of the sunrise. Next to the photos of Elliot, it seemed to fit perfectly, not replacing his memory, but extending it somehow. "I registered for a painting class," Zeke told her as they sat down for tea. "Starting next month. The instructor is well known in the area." "Wonderful," Mabel said, still occasionally glancing at the new painting on her wall. Elliot would have loved to take classes from a professional. He was mostly self-taught, you know. They talked for nearly an hour, about art, about Elliot, about Zeke's father. There was an easiness to their conversation now, the barriers between them completely gone. As Zeke prepared to leave for his next delivery, Mabel suddenly took his hand. "You've given me something I never expected to have again," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. "Hope. A connection to the future, rather than just the past." Zeke squeezed her hand. "You've given me something, too. A direction. A purpose." Their hug goodbye felt different. Equal, balanced, a connection between two people who had found unexpected meaning in each other's lives. "Same time tomorrow?" Mabel asked as Zeke stepped onto the porch. "Wouldn't miss it," Zeke replied with a smile. As he drove away, Zeke glanced in his rearview mirror. Mabel stood in her doorway as she always did, watching him leave. But today she wasn't waiting for tomorrow's delivery. She was simply savoring the moment, this moment, right now, when past and future had finally found a way to exist together in peace. 1 month later, Zeke pulled up to Mabel's house with a sense of excitement. Today wasn't just any delivery day. It was the first day of his art classes, and Mabel had insisted on making a special lunch to celebrate. As always, she was waiting by the window, but today Rosa was with him. After weeks of hearing about Mabel, his mother had finally arranged a day off from her part-time job at the grocery store to meet the woman who had become so important in her son's life. "You must be Rosa," Mabel said warmly as they approached the door. "I've been so looking forward to meeting you." The two women embraced as if they were old friends rather than new acquaintances. There was an immediate understanding between them. Two mothers who had faced loss and hardship with grace. Inside, Mabel had prepared a feast. Homemade empanadas that she'd learned to make just for Rosa. A fresh salad from her garden. And a cake decorated with paintbrushes made of colored icing. "This is too much," Rosa protested, but her eyes shone with pleasure at the thoughtful gesture. "Nonsense," Mabel replied. "Today is special." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily between the three of them. Rosa shared stories about Zeke's tatouage, childhood artistic endeavors, the time he covered a whole wall with crayon drawings, the clay sculptures he made in elementary school, the comic book he created in middle school. "He always had talent," Rosa said proudly. "My husband saw it first, always encouraged him." Mabel nodded, listening intently. Elliot was the same way. Couldn't keep him away from colors and paper. Made quite a mess sometimes, but it was always worth it to see what he created. After lunch, While Rosa helped Mabel with the dishes, Zeke noticed something new on the mantel, a framed photograph he hadn't seen before. It showed a young man who must be Elliot standing next to a bearded truck driver beside a large semi-truck. "Mabel?" Zeke called, picking up the frame. "Is this?" Mabel came into the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Yes," she said softly. "That's Elliot with your father." Zeke stared at the photograph in amazement. "But how? When was this taken?" "About a month before the accident," Mabel explained. "Your father delivered some art supplies to the school where Elliot was studying. They got talking about painting. Your father mentioned his son liked to draw." She smiled at the memory. They took quite a shine to each other. Elliot even showed him around the art studio. Rosa had joined them now, her eyes wide as she looked at the photograph. "Sam never told me about this," she said, taking the frame from Zeke to look more closely. "That's definitely him, though. I found the picture when I was going through Elliot's things recently," Mabel said. "It was in one of his sketchbooks. On the back, he'd written Sam Williams, truck driver extraordinaire and art enthusiast." Zeke felt goosebumps rise on his arms. His father and Elliot had met before the accident, had talked about art, had talked about him. So when Dad stopped, "At the accident?" Zeke began. He recognized Elliot, Mabel finished. "That's why he stayed with him, why he came to the funeral." They weren't strangers. The three of them sat down together, the photograph passing between them like a precious relic. "There's more," Mabel said after a moment. "Something I only learned recently myself, when Mr. Jenkins at the cemetery gave me access to all the visitor logs." She reached for a small notebook on the coffee table and opened it to a marked page. "Your father came to Elliot's grave every year on the anniversary of the accident, for 22 years until his own passing. Mr. Jenkins said he would sit there for an hour, sometimes talking quietly." Tears filled Rosa's eyes. "He never told me," she whispered. "He always went for a long drive on that day. Said he needed to clear his head. Some burdens are too heavy to share," Mabel said, echoing what she'd told Zeke weeks ago. "Even with those we love most." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in thought about the connections that had existed without their knowledge for so many years. Finally, Rosa spoke. "I think they brought us together," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Sam and Elliot. Somehow, they made this happen." Mabel reached out and took Rosa's hand. "I believe that too." Later, as Zeke prepared to leave for his first art class, the three of them stood together on Mabel's porch. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the garden, making the flowers seem to shimmer. "I have something for you," Mabel said, handing Zeke a small package wrapped in blue paper. A first day of school gift. Inside was a card signed by both Mabel and Rosa. With it was a small golden paintbrush pin, professional looking, the kind real artists wore on their lapels. It was Elliot's, Mabel explained. "He received it when he was accepted into the exhibition. I want you to have it." Zeke carefully pinned it to his shirt collar, deeply moved by the gesture. "I'll wear it with pride," he promised. The three of them shared a group hug before Zeke headed to his car. As he drove away, he glanced in his rearview mirror to see Mabel and his mother standing side by side, waving goodbye. Two women from different worlds, brought together by tragedy and hope, by a delivery route that led to daily hugs, by the strange, beautiful connections that life sometimes reveals when we least expect them. At a stoplight, Zeke touched the golden paintbrush pin and thought about everything that had happened since. That day, he first noticed Mabel's tears. The discoveries, the revelations, the healing that had taken place for all of them. His father and Elliot had known each other, had talked about art, had formed a connection that somehow reached across time to bring their families together 25 years later. Some might call it coincidence. Zeke preferred to think of it as something else, something deeper and more meaningful. A reminder that no act of kindness is ever truly lost, that connections between people can transcend even death. As he pulled into the parking lot of the art school, Zeke felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. He was exactly where he needed to be, carrying with him the legacies of two good men who had touched each other's lives in ways that continued to ripple outward. Zeke Williams, delivery driver, artist, keeper of connections. Today, he would create something new. That's the end of our story, the Daily Embrace. Did it touch your heart? I hope Zeke and Mabel's special connection reminded you that kindness can create bonds that last forever. Where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please tap that like button and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us share more stories about compassion, connection, and the beautiful moments that make life meaningful. And if you're looking for another heartwarming tale, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. It's about a forgotten birthday that leads to an unexpected friendship. I promise it's just as touching as Mabel and Zeke's journey. Remember, a simple act of kindness might create ripples you never imagined. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.